I'm your host, Michael King, and welcome to another inspirational interview here on Artful Minds. For anyone new or anybody who just doesn't know, Artful Minds is an online community dedicated to nurturing artistic talents and fostering creative growth among its members. We have two types of membership. One's all access and the other one's critiques. All access, of course, gives you access to everything, and critique membership gives you 2 full critiques each month. And what better way to improve your painting than through critiques? If you're interested, head on over to artfulminds.ca. And just because it's .ca doesn't mean we're focused on Canadian artists. We have members throughout the world. So welcome, everybody. And without further ado, our inspirational discussion today was Renato Muccillo, a renowned Canadian oil painter, recognized for his ability to transport viewers into the heart of his realistic landscapes. And when you see him on Instagram, you just go, holy So welcome, Renato.
Hey everybody, how you guys doing?
I'm just going to scroll through about 12 pieces of your work. And as I do that, can you just do a little synopsis of who you are and what you do?
Well, I think most of you know what I'm kind of about and what my subject matters are based on. A lot of what you're seeing online here are firsthand kind of observations, paintings based on my own personal experiences and based on the area that I live. I'm fortunate enough, and I'm sure Mike will attest to this, is we live in Maple Ridge and we live in one of the most beautiful places, probably in Western Canada, but as of late, some of the subject matters have been kind of pushed to the limits of extremes as far as current conditions, environmental sorts of issues. I'm sure anybody who follows on Instagram has probably seen some of the latest work, some of the flood paintings, some of the fire paintings, that sort of thing. So yeah, all of what you're seeing currently, this is all within, I want to say 10 kilometers of my home, 6 miles, fairly close. So I've got the good fortune of being able to see this and paint it at will, collect, information and inspiration from living out here. So
awesome. And one last one, I believe.
Yeah.
Is good old Sam.
Hey, buddy. There he is. He's over there, by the way. He's not participating in the call, but he seems to have chosen the other bed. So
yeah, if anybody follows Renato on Instagram, his stories are always great because Sam's always the highlight. So
yeah,
very nice. And I find one of the biggest challenges for me whenever you post a new image is trying to figure it out where it exactly is.
Well, you've got the experience. You've seen most of it, right? You've painted most of it. You're in the field all the time, so
yeah,
what it's about, right? So
yeah, absolutely. Some of them stop me though, without a doubt.
Here he comes. Hang on a sec.
Is he making his way over?
Come here, buddy.
There he is.
There he goes. There he goes.
Getting comfy.
Yeah, if you hear any snoring, it's coming from him. So
all right. So the first question I have for you here is, you've ventured into many subjects over the years, from what I've come across. Now, how did you land on just landscapes?
It's one of those things. I think landscape for me and for most landscape painters. You being a landscape painter as well. Landscape resonates with you, right? It seems to be the vehicle, the subject matter, the vehicle that kind of best allows you to express what you're trying to say and what you kind of do. It hits you in a way that nothing else does. Some people are, figure painters, right? And this is what they love to do, and this is where they excel. And it's just, for me, it's landscape. It always has been. I've spent most of my life out in the areas that I paint, luckily enough, with my parents and my father. And I literally live, I could probably throw a stone from my deck and hit the river from here. An area that we used to fish as a child back in the 70s, in the early 70s, right? It's changed a lot, but I feel really lucky to be able to experience it every day when I walk the dog. It just brings back great memories, and
No doubt. Yeah. So you kind of insinuated that you've always done landscapes, but I know you started on kind of wildlife in your younger years, then you've actually done some quite abstract pieces, which kind of shocked me when I saw it. That's
shocks most. Yeah.
No doubt. That said, though, the journey from wildlife or the abstract or still lifes, everything like that, how's that influenced you in your landscape painting, if at all?
All of it kind of lends itself to where I'm at now, right? And when you allow yourself, I'm not quite sure what he's doing there. When you get into different genres of work that require a different skill set, such, abstract is a perfect example, right? You've got the freedom. You're not being literal in any sense of the word. You're painting purely through expression, right? Whatever that is. And, you're learning a skill set by doing it. You may not succeed or think you're succeeding as an abstract painter, but you're walking away with something very useful, even if it's just on the application of paint or medium in paint, or
Mhm.
how you attack it. You suddenly start to see certain things that you can apply to your future paintings, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So
Realistic,
do you think,
whatever, right? So
yeah, did you think your journey through abstraction kind of helped you distill down the landscape a little bit better?
absolutely, yeah,
Mm.
absolutely. It helped me with my kind of attack on um kind of the I'm going to move him outside because he's becoming very distracting. Hang on one second.
Okay, no worries.
Come here, bud. Sorry about that. And where were we? Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where your plan of attack changes slightly when you're able to paint freely without any sort of, I guess, parameters of what you're staying within the box, right? Landscape painting, especially when I paint how I paint, you know there's a certain, you stay within the margins to some degree, right? In the end, I mean, it's ultimately, you want to basically resolve paintings so they look a particular way, right?
Mhm.
Realist method. But when you actually get to look at my work in person, you really kind of start to see some of those abstract kind of approaches to the
Yeah.
energy, because I leave a lot of that kind of exposed, and unless you actually get to see the work in person, you can't really see it on a 1 by 1 inch image
No, that's right.
phone,
Yeah.
right? You just can't, even if you
Yeah.
blow it up, right? I mean, it seems very resolved, and the work itself is not nearly as resolved as you may think it is. So
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
there's
And so
there's
that,
there's a great deal of painterly spirit in that image, right? It's not like an ultra tight illustration by any means. So
no, that's right. And in the end, you say it's constrained, but from my understanding of listening to you in previous interviews, at the beginning, it's not really constrained at all. It is just masses of values.
yeah,
And as you progress down, you kind of,
yeah,
those
just
shapes
whittle
where you're
it.
applying paint get
Yeah,
smaller and smaller.
yeah,
And yeah, if you ever do see Renato's piece in person, what you'll see is application of paint in an area or in a shape, but never overly blended to make it
yeah.
as realistic as you think it really is. It's
Yeah,
quite interesting.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there are a lot of optical illusion, right?
Yeah,
It's
100%. That's a good word for it.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's exactly what that is. It's optical illusion, and
Yeah.
basically, taking the sweet spots of each painting and resolving it to a point of where your eye will automatically go to it. Those are your focal points,
Yeah.
and those will always be the most resolved, right? And
Yeah.
the brain just has this way of putting the rest of it together, right?
Yeah.
But still keeping it very visually interesting
Yeah.
at the
Yeah.
same time.
Yeah. Have to agree with that.
Yeah.
Now, you're a little bit older than me, not much, but that said, you remember the 70s more than I do because you grew up in them more. Back then in the 70s, we
Mhm.
had what, the library and the Encyclopedia Britannica.
Pretty much it. Yeah.
Now,
The library.
so your journey into painting was well, from my understanding of it, was no instruction, no mentor, just
Mm.
looking at things and going, I want to do this, and doing it and failing
Yeah.
and going it over again until you learn.
Yeah.
So how long of a process did that take you to get to a certain point where you're satisfied with your paintings?
Well, I mean, I started painting. I literally started painting when I was 8, right? And
Damn.
yeah, I mean, it was just, I was kind of like a dog with a bone, right? I was so hyper focused on being creative. I mean, it was just something that came very naturally and drove me. And you know, it, I, I still kind of strive, to kind of get my game together, right? I mean, it's kind of this never ending, journey as far as improving and that sort of thing, right? But I mean, by the time I was probably in my mid 20s, I kind of had a handle on, the basics and the fundamentals of what I needed
So
to
about 20 years then.
about 20 years. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I was selling work at 10, right? At the local art store, right? So I had a taste of it pretty early, and I was lucky enough. My sister worked there, right? So
Gotcha.
I was friends with the owners, and they were, very accommodating. But yeah, it was just one of those things. And, it was,
Nice. So it's the community nurturing the talent,
it
right? I mean,
was
that's
absolutely,
fantastic.
yeah, yeah, it
Yeah.
was absolutely, and
Nice.
yeah, family were, they supported what I was doing as a kid. I mean, I don't think they necessarily thought I'd ever go down the road of becoming a career artist, but
No doubt.
I think it wasn't until about 10 years ago did they actually kind of really see the scope of what was happening, right? So
That's funny, eh? That's funny.
yeah,
I
yeah.
wonder if the person who has your very first painting from that art store realizes what they have.
Well, this was the ongoing joke, because it was their thing was I was their youngest customer, and the person that ended up buying it was literally their oldest customer. So, and
Wow.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, this was 1975, and I think he paid $30 for it then. Right?
Oh, that's a big chunk of cash
It
back
was a
then, eh?
big chunk of change, big
Yeah.
change, right, for a kid my age.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, and it ended up going
Dang.
straight into the pockets of the art supply store, because I just kept
Yeah.
buying more stuff, right? And yeah,
That's a good little
yeah,
scheme, eh? They sell
yeah,
you
well,
work, you buy more
yeah,
supplies. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, we get paid off, right? So
Yeah.
yeah,
Your Instagram feed is pretty much filled with landscape, 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 landscape.
yeah,
Amazing as they are, it's always you get very used to what you're seeing and expecting from Renato. Now, last year you pulled the drone out of your hat,
I did.
and that first post is like, "What is
Yeah,
this?"
yeah.
And for those who haven't seen him here, I'm just going to pull up some of his drone shots. And can you, as I do that, can you talk about kind of how that started and why you decided to go that way?
Well, it was one of those things. I was always I was lucky enough that I was given a drone for Christmas, and it was just I always was fascinated by the idea of aerial perspectives. And I would often go to the bridge, the Golden Ears Bridge, which is a huge bridge, bridge I'm talking about, and look down the Fraser, from a height of probably 200 feet, I'm guessing. And, it was always a really interesting sort of perspective as a landscape painter, right? You really don't you're always sitting at ground level looking up, big skies, low horizons or whatever, but you're very limited as far as how you portray, the earth or the ground, right?
Hmm.
It's really forced perspectives and that sort of thing if you're trying to convey space. And with a drone, it was, it just opened up the possibilities of interpretation of landscape painting, and having an actual bird's eye view and getting into areas that you normally couldn't get into, right? I started going into the Fraser Valley and droning the Fraser River during its flood stage.
Hmm.
And I mean, it was amazing, like just amazing, because you just don't have a sense of what's happening during those high water times until you're on top of it looking down and thinking, wow, this is like, it's a monster, right? Yeah. And it's just the ability to convey landscape, bringing landscape to a completely different level. I mean, this is technology is, I mean, I'm an old school guy. I love technology and I hate technology, but I love that technology, that photographic
Yeah.
technology. It's just, it really, it
Yeah.
opened up so much creative. Um, it's got the creative juices just flowing again, right? You spend so
No
much time.
doubt.
I've lived in this area for almost 20 years now, and I've painted it for 20 years. And, it doesn't matter how much of a muse something is, you paint it for 20 years and it kind of loses, its,
Mhm.
its fascination. And
Yeah.
but as soon as the drone came in, yeah, it became very interesting again. It just kind of revitalized my want and will to paint the area again, but from a completely different viewpoint.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Did you
yeah,
anticipate that it was going to be such a critical factor for you?
I didn't, but I did. I mean, in
Yeah.
some degree, it was like, oh, what I'll be able to see and what I'll be able to do, and all of those things, right?
Yeah.
Until you're up there and you're looking at the landscape through, again, a small monitor, and then you get it home and you download it onto a big screen, and you're just like, wow, like it's just amazing, right? And what those
Yeah.
things can actually do is astonishing. I mean, you can shoot images in raw. You can do all kinds of things, right? You've got all of the control of a regular camera, but one that'll go 1,000 feet in the air, and
Yeah.
6 miles away, 10 kilometers away if you wanted to, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
quite amazing. So
No doubt. Now this is kind of a cheeky remark slash
yeah,
comment. Now because we're talking about photos, and I know you've heard this a million times, but I want
yeah,
to know what your reaction is every time someone sees a painting in person, or they come up to you and say, "Wow, your paintings look just like photos."
yeah.
What's your reaction to that? Not what you
Um,
say to them. What's your reaction? Because some
well,
people get really
it's
angry.
my
Wow.
first reaction is you obviously haven't seen my work in person, right? You're looking at my
Mm.
work on a small screen or a computer screen, right? But until you can actually get face to face with it, you'll come to realize that, yeah, it's not nearly as photographic as you imagine it. Your mind is telling you that, but it's quite painterly, and there's a lot of looseness to the work, but there's just enough information that,
Yeah. Well, that's more of a polite answer than I wanted, but anyway.
yeah, well, it's great. Well, no, but it's the truth, right? I mean, I'm flattered, sure. It's
Yeah.
that convincing. Well, that means what I'm doing is that convincing as well, and that's great.
In terms of going the opposite direction, no, not the opposite direction, but something a little bit more different for you is I'm going to bring up some of your sketches here that you
Yeah,
recently did. I think you started this from what I see on Instagram last year.
I did this sketching. Doing these drawings they were things some of you may or may not know this, but both my parents, my father was ill a few years ago and passed away a few years back. But during his illness, we were starting to spend a lot more time at their home, taking care of them. And after my father died, my mother, who is suffering from dementia now, was living at home, and I was spending 4 days a week there, and I couldn't work. So it was just one of those things where, out of necessity, I needed to do something creative while I
Hmm.
was taking care of her. And so this was the easiest medium for me to transport back and forth. And I mean, again, it was just it was as valuable as the drone, because for me, I'm a kind of paint guy. Like I see something and I'm like, gotta paint it, right to the
Yeah.
easel, and just away I go, right? And sitting down and having to really kind of think about what I'm doing, because doing these drawings were very much like doing watercolors. You wanted to make sure that everything was where it was going to be and where it needed to be. You didn't want to be, going in there and just rubbing stuff back, because it just destroys the paper. And
Yeah.
so it just allowed me, and again, it was just one of those things where I just didn't think that these drawings were going to go anywhere. They were just drawings,
Yeah.
right? They were just
Yeah.
drawings. But suddenly I started to realize, like, wow, this is quite enjoyable. I really do like this. And now what I like to try and do is incorporate some of these into my shows, and that sort of thing. It's finished pieces, right?
Yeah. That's right.
Great
Yeah.
big
Yeah.
frames on great big mats, and make them look quite special, even
Yeah.
tiny jewels, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
That's right.
but
Now,
yeah,
creatively, sorry.
no, and that's where
Okay.
those came from. So I've
Yeah.
got a sketchbook.
Okay.
I've had sketchbook, and this is a funny thing. Is like I've had sketchbooks. I've got one sketchbook that I've had for 30 years, and it's probably not even half full, right? And any of the line drawings and sketches that are in it are just, I mean, literally, I want to burn it just because it's horrible. But
Yeah.
I'm not a guy that sits down and sketches a lot, right? I'm a guy
Yeah.
that likes to, shoot images, and just kind of get my brain going, and just put, paint on canvas and start at it, right? And
Yeah. For sure.
that's how I've always painted. So
Now, well, drawing is very creatively different, as you mentioned, than
it is,
painting.
yeah.
So I guess it kind of gave your painting brain a rest. And so when you got back in the studio, did you find your running as soon as you got there, or did you find you had to collect yourself again?
No. What it did, which this was again a really interesting exercise, was I found that my brush abilities had improved greatly, vastly, because of the fact that I
Interesting.
was holding a pencil, and quite tight and and exact, like just being very exact with what I was doing. And with brush, my brush work, it's usually just quite loose until I get into the nitty gritty. But I just found that my brush control had improved greatly. That was the one thing I noticed that was very, very positive. But as far as how I approached it, didn't really change.
Hmm.
I was just, yeah, I came out
Okay.
swinging with paint again, right? So,
Yeah, yeah. That's
you know,
interesting. Okay.
but again, it opened up a whole bunch of possibilities. These drawings were, I was like, yeah, that'd make a great painting. That would make a great painting. That would make a great drawing, and that's all it should be, is a great drawing, right?
Yeah.
But yeah,
Nice.
will I incorporate it again into? Yeah, I will, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
winter is here, so I'll be spending more time in the studio now, right? It's kind of hard in the summer.
Oh, true.
Just want to go
Yeah,
deep.
no doubt. Right. Yeah, it's so hot
Yeah.
too. So the type of painter you are you one that kind of starts the painting and just is dedicated until the end, or do you have two or three on the go?
I've got a bunch on the go all the time.
Oh, okay.
But
Interesting.
there's always, I've got paintings that I've had in the studio for years, years and
Mm,
years, and I'll get to them, and something ain't happening, something ain't working, and I'll just kind of put it aside again until I've got some answers. Right? These are paintings are they're really like puzzles, right?
mm.
And some paintings, they just kind of fly off the brush. You just it just seamless, right? Just totally seamless. And then there's others that are just problematic, and it's like you can't finish them because you just don't have the answer, right?
Yeah. Well,
And
maybe you
it's
should use your sketchbook more often.
well, that's just it.
Kidding.
Yeah, no, it's one of those things. But I will work on three or four at a time, and
Mm,
I'll once I get into the zone on one where it's like, okay, well, this is getting close, and I don't want to stop painting this one because I know if I do, I'll get derailed, and then I'll just take it right to the very end and finish it, right? So
gotcha. Gotcha.
yeah,
Okay. Now we talked about finishing, but at the beginning, how do you know? Like you take hundreds, probably thousands of photographs now.
thousands.
How do you know that's the one you're gonna paint? Is there something you've drawn to it? You just instinctively know,
Ins
or do you have to convince
Instinctively, no.
yourself?
It's just
Okay.
it's an instinctive. I can draw something out of virtually any photograph that I have on my camera or on my phone. I just, can compose it, crop it, just kind of work, shift stuff around, but I know I can make it work. But it's kind of like, someone who plays piano or guitar or something. They just
Mm,
instinctively can hear something and know how to decipher it, right? And it's kind of the same thing for me visually. I can just see it and go, yeah, that would make a great painting. That would just make a fantastic painting, right?
do you know the proportions and the canvas size right away? You kind of
Yeah, right away.
know.
Yeah, right away. It's
Okay.
like, yeah, I'll take
Interesting.
that. That'd be great square. That'd be a great rectangle. That'd be great, as a vertical or horizontal, whatever, right? It's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
you kind of have this sense of what would work most of the time, right? But again, it's kind of when you've been doing it for 40 years, right?
Yeah. That's right. So I guess it doesn't take you very long to flesh out the composition and kind of what you want to do with it then, eh?
But again,
Nice.
once I do, today's a perfect example. We were down at the river today, and I'm working on a larger piece right now, and it was just one of those things where you got to go back down again and just kind of sort out the details. You just need to experience it. You need to experience it, right? You can compose it, doesn't always work. Sometimes you need to go down and take a look at some variations of that composition to basically maybe change it around
Yeah.
a little bit to work for you. So
Gotcha. Gotcha.
nothing is just that easy. Right? You get lucky sometimes, but most of the
Yeah.
time
Yeah.
it's like,
Well,
there's
experience
a little
helps
bit
too,
of a
right? So.
scramble. Yeah.
Simple question, but complicated as well. How important is mark making? I mean, you briefly
Mark
mentioned it
making?
earlier, but how important
Mark
is it to
making
your
is
work?
everything.
Okay, yeah.
It is mark making is for me is kind of the heart of the painting, right? I'm about as much about subtractive application as I am, people just continually building paintings up, right? Layer after layer of paint. For me, the most fun for me is sitting down and going, okay, this is what I kind of want to do, and this is kind of the idea I have, and just putting paint down and pushing it around with old nasty brushes and rags and all kinds of stuff, and just kind of pulling out all of these little forms and shape. I'm a true believer with paint. Paint is at its best when it's transparent, right? When
Mm.
you very thin layers of it, pure color. As soon as you start adding whites or other colors to it, it kind of does strange things, right? And it kind of loses its luster and its kind of its true beauty. And there's just something about putting paint down really thin and washy and just kind of like hitting highlights with the rag and just all the edges that kind of form naturally with it, right? They all kind of have this weird, interesting glow to them just because of the density of pigment that's sitting on the surface and allowing the white of the canvas to kind of work as a backlight, right? As opposed to putting whites down and that sort of thing, or developing a
Yeah.
paint
So
with
just
that.
understanding your materials and your material handling, and
Yeah, and that's
yeah,
again that's just part of the learning experience, right? And
yeah,
it's and I say this all the time, right? I mean, I can tell people till I'm blue in the face what and how to do it, but the only way you're going to learn to do it is just do it, right?
yeah,
You got to spend the time and do it.
yeah,
It's one of those things. Experience is the most it's the most valuable thing, right? And
yeah, yeah.
time spent mixing paint and putting paint down, whether they're successful paintings or not, you just
Oh
right?
yeah, you got to
Most
fail. You
important
got to
thing, you
fail.
gotta figure it out.
Only
Yeah,
way.
I
Yeah,
mean, you spend a lot of time out in the field painting, right?
yeah.
And every time you go out there, I'm sure you learn something new, right?
Oh
And
yeah,
yeah, and it's like whether you realize it or not, you're going to come away with something that's going to be important in your future, right? So,
absolutely. Sorry, I just got
questions.
distracted by chat.
Yeah.
Yeah, just looking at some of the chats. And this one kind of makes me chuckle just a little bit. Do you do plein air studies or work from photos only?
Working. Don't you start with me, Michael. Um, Yeah, you know what? I'm a studio guy, and
Yeah,
I take the times that I am out painting plein air. It really is enjoyable. I mean, I really do enjoy it. But most of what I do is basically taken from just a collection of thousands of photographs. Right? I just have stock files, right? Of just things that I need, but I'm finding more and more now that I need to be outside because even with the technology that as good as it is, I mean, I've got an iPhone 14 that shoots like a 48 meg photograph. It still isn't as accurate as just being outside, you know?
yeah. And that's the thing. You're not just going out taking photographs, coming home. You walk these dice constantly in every
Yeah,
different
every single
type
day.
of weather,
Yeah,
every hour of the day.
yeah.
So you see all the effects all the time, and you're always observing. So in a sense, you're doing your plein air observation and using that experience,
It's just
right? I
I'm just
mean,
not playing. I'm so self-conscious, and this is strange, to hear from a guy that's been painting for as long as I have, I'm sure. And I'm sure most of you will probably agree that don't do a lot of plein air painting. You become very, very self-conscious, and it's one of those things where dealing with failure is like, I just don't handle them very well in the studio, and it's kind of like I feel like I've let myself down by not being able to figure something out. And being out in the field, and I think that would just be it would be really, really hard. At least that's what I keep telling myself, right? It would be very, very hard to deal with, knowing that you're unable to pull something out of it that you wanted to, right?
mhm,
That you should have been able to do because you've been painting for so long. And
yeah,
and it's a different animal altogether, right? Studio painting is very, it's very kind of premeditated, very relaxed. There's no time kind of, time limits. And when you're out in the field, you've got X amount of time to try and do what you need to do. And, having time kind of leaning on you hard, that's just something for me. Like, it's not easy, right? It's not
yeah,
easy.
for
And
sure,
I have
right?
a tremendous amount of respect for people who can do it. I mean, seriously, like you devoted to being out there, and that's pretty fantastic, man. So
Thanks, appreciate it. Yeah. Here's a fun one. You grew up in Vancouver in the 70s. When
yeah.
did you first see your real masterwork in person, and kind of what was the impact?
Oh boy. Well, I guess it really, you have to define, masterwork. I mean, Vancouver sadly doesn't have a great gallery, right? Like the Vancouver Art Gallery it's okay, right? It's not fantastic. It's got a great collection of, Canadian works, but I think what really kind of well, I mean, it's an interesting, like real historically significant work would have been Group of Seven, and that was probably 25 years ago, 20 years ago. They had a major exhibition of Group of Seven, and if some of you don't know who Group of Seven is, you look at the history of Canadian art, and it's really quite a great story, and it's turn of the century, and art went from this European kind of sensibility of realist to really strong impressionisms, and it was just the whole story behind the group. Anyways, that kind of just changed my trajectory as far as how I looked at painting. Guys like I saw Ross Penhall, one of Ross Penhall's shows down at Bushel and Mowat, 30 years ago, and when Ross was just kind of coming out of the gates. And I remember seeing it, and it just was like, wow, this is amazing, right? The paintings were amazing. What really kind of sunk in was the fact that you could actually do this for a living, right? Like, here are people that are actually making a living. I mean, Ross he was a fireman, right? And he was juggling these two different careers, but it was kind of like, wow, okay, and he was making a very lasting impression on the whole West Coast scene, and I credit that to kind of the direction of my life, right? It was
Interesting. I guess just because it's so, if people don't know Ross's work, is very stark and simple,
yeah.
kind of the direct opposite of the realism you strive for. So it probably was, and I don't want to say a shocker, but it was probably so intriguing for you to see, right?
Yeah, it was just kind of my taste of the reality of what this career could do, right? This choice of a career could do. And if you worked hard and had the right people supporting you, and the right galleries working and working for you, then yeah, it was all very doable.
Yeah. And I guess that brings us to the idea of a professional artist, right? No matter what, especially when you're painting for your shows in Arcadia
Yeah,
or the other one in the States and White Rock, you have to put the time in
yeah, well,
every
absolutely.
day. So on average, how often do you stay in the studio?
Well, I mean, there's during the summer, I mean, up to basically my deadline at Arcadia, which, and that show opened in June. I mean, I was in studio, it seemed like every single day. I mean, between juggling, family and my mom and all that kind of stuff, and her home, and kind of working kind of between the two places, every day, right? Every day. It's just you got to put the time in, and you
Yeah.
have to be disciplined. I mean, that is, discipline is probably as important being a professional artist, or even being an artist, even as a part-time artist. If you can't put the time in, right, it's just it's very difficult. I mean, and people around you have to understand that. I mean, it requires that sort of commitment.
Way more than any day job, way more,
Absolutely,
because you're
absolutely.
always thinking it, right?
Yeah, yeah, you live
Yeah.
it, right? It's just one of those things. That's the
Yeah.
unfortunate or unfortunate reality of right-sided thinkers, right? Right brain people.
Yeah,
Art is with you
absolutely.
all the time. So
This next question I find really interesting in the sense that where do you keep your references while painting? In your photos, in the photos of your paintings, it seems always way off to the side. And the reason I wanted to ask that one is because it shows that your reference is there for only a reference, but you're making all the decisions in your painting for the sake of the painting, not for the sake of the reference. Would that be an accurate statement?
absolutely. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it's, a lot of the time, I mean, I'm having to start to wear glasses, right? Like reading glasses and that sort of thing. So, and I just find that, I can't, I'm looking at basic forms and shapes, and, that's pretty much it, really. I want to,
Yeah.
my interest is more about, color temperatures, and, those are the really kind of crucial things, right? The details, I mean, that all comes at the end. And when you're composing things, you just want to make sure that you get those elements and values and all of those things kind of right. The rest of it is just it's stuff that will bog you down if you stare at it for too long, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Just be glad you don't have bifocals. You'd be sitting at your canvas like this the whole time.
that's coming. I know it's coming, right? So it's one of those things where I have a feeling there's going to be an adjustment curve coming as well. So
No doubt,
a
no
lot
doubt.
of griping about that.
This is a really good question, I think. In the development of your style,
Yeah.
were there any criticisms you received that you disregarded and kept a part of your current style? Anything specific that you said, I disagree, this works for me, and it worked?
You know what? I usually don't listen too much to people's criticism. I just don't. We all, it's subjective, right? Art is subjective, and how you create art is equally subjective. And it's,
Mhm.
one artist may not agree, even a collector, whatever, gallery may not, agree completely with what you're doing, but ultimately, only you know what makes you happy. And if you start listening to everybody around you, man, it's going to be a rough road for you, right? It
Yeah,
really
yeah,
is. It's just you honestly just need to follow your own gut, and and again, this probably has a lot to do with being self-taught, right? It was a road that I kind of paved for myself, and the mistakes I made, and I really never looked at them as being mistakes. They were just, that was the learning curve, right? And I tell everybody, I mean, I could probably spend my day doing nothing but telling people how to paint, teaching people how to paint. But, you
mm,
know, and it's like the further you go down the road that I've paved for myself, right, the longer it's going to take for you to get back off that and find your own way, right? I've always been an advocate of just experience is key, right? So,
yeah. Just take your own path. That's great. That's great.
yeah.
And so, well, I guess maybe you wouldn't do much different, but if you were to do it all over again, what would you change?
To be honest, the only one thing as far as my career goes, nothing, zero, absolutely nothing. I feel like I made all of the right decisions at the time I did, and
Hmm.
to basically bring me to where I'm at now. The one thing that I wish I would have done differently, and again, I mean, this is just an unfortunate reality of most creative people, is just be less critical of myself, to trust myself. I wish I would have trusted myself when I was in my 20s, right? To make decisions about my future, or even about the work at the time. It was, you're just plagued by self-doubt. It's just the unfortunate reality of what we do. But I guess if you're not questioning yourself, then you're never growing, right? So, but I just wish I would have given myself a break a little bit earlier.
Yeah, yeah, no
You
doubt.
know?
So you never did, or you never came into the urge of galleries kind of telling you what they want and you producing it. Then you've kind of just always just done your thing and they've
No.
accepted it the way it's been, right?
It's, I've been really, really lucky. I've been with the White Rock Gallery here on the West Coast for 30 years now. 30 years, that's a long relationship. And the previous owner, they just recently sold the gallery. And the previous owner she knew exactly what her client wanted, but she was always open to what I would give her as well. Like, she was always open. If I wanted to do some still life work, some figurative work, whatever, they're always open to putting it on the wall. Didn't necessarily mean it was going to sell, but she was never like, oh, we can't hang that, right?
Yeah,
She always looked at it as being something beneficial, right? It's like, he's not just a landscape painter, he is also
that's a
a
unique view for
well
galleries.
versed, yeah, right. And that's,
Yeah,
I mean, wall space, right? I mean, it's valuable, and a lot of galleries just won't give it to you unless they know that it's worth their time doing, right?
yeah. So is that where all your abstract still lives ended up on their walls?
It did to some degree. Most of them did so. Yeah, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, which is really kind of cool. It's thank you to the people that found some value in them, right, and loved them enough to bring them home and hang them on their wall.
Yeah, that's nice. That's nice. Now, it, you, like you say, you have been very lucky through life, which is a great thing.
Absolutely.
But there had to be some times where you were just outright rejected. And, artists go through rejection all the time. How did you handle that? And how did you channel that? Or
You
did you
know,
just ignore it and pluck it off your shoulder?
Personally, I mean, I really lucky in the sense that my own, I think most of the rejections that I ever had to deal with were more personal. Oh, not so much personal, but self-inflicted, right? Like, yeah, I mean, I just would really tear myself up about things, and put a lot of pressure on myself. I mean, I've always kind of approached my career and my work as an artist as, if I was dealing with someone who is representing me or dealing with my work for me, is that I always said that I would never approach a gallery, ever, period. I would No, I would allow galleries to come to me. And
Man, that's bold.
well, it was one of those things. I had one gallery that, White Rock Gallery, they took me on in my wildlife years, right? This is back
Yeah.
in the very early 90s, late 80s. And, so I was lucky. I had that foundation. I had that source to basically move my work or, hang my work. So they were selling everything I was giving them. So it was good. And I always just kind of thought, she really loved my work, right? And they still love my work. And it's just one of those things where I'd rather have a gallery who is really interested in what you're doing,
Hmm.
come knock on my door and say, we'd love to represent you because we love what you're doing, as opposed to going
Yeah.
knocking on a door and going, well, we don't know. We don't know if we have the space. Suddenly you lose that power, right?
Yeah.
You are at the mercy of the gallery, right? And that's just
Yeah.
the thing I would never allow myself to be in a position of, right?
Yeah.
Was
That's a great viewpoint, because how dedicated are they selling you your work if they don't
exactly.
love it,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Right.
And
And
that could be the reason why you do so well in them all.
yeah, I guess. I don't know. It's again, I've been very, very fortunate. I've just had great representation my whole life. And I've
Yeah.
had a lot. I mean, I think at one point maybe just 3 galleries at one time were representing me. And
Yeah.
now it's just basically two, right? And it's between the two of them, yeah. And then they do very well. And
Very nice.
yeah. But as far as rejection goes, yeah, I mean, I've never put myself in a position, as
Mhm.
far as, someone saying, no, we're just not interested in your work. I
You
mean,
live such a sheltered
I
life.
think once, and just once, and that was oh gosh, what gallery was it now? Equinox in Vancouver.
Oh,
Equinox is the big one, right? In Vancouver.
yeah.
Giant. And they basically just said, like, oh, what are we supposed to do with it? This is not our genre of work, right? And it
Mm.
really isn't. I mean, they're very contemporary. So I mean,
Yeah.
it kind of got me, got my knickers in a twist, and I was kind of like, yeah. But the reality is he was just being completely honest about it, right? It's
Yeah. It
like,
just didn't
"Well,
fit
we don't have the
yeah.
clientele for it, right? We don't sell your
Yeah.
your style of work, right?" So
That's funny.
we didn't take it, because then it
Yeah.
could have been a very different situation, and my own opinions about what I was doing may have been very different, right? So
Yeah. True enough. Right. Yeah.
yeah,
Your start at the White Rock Gallery,
yeah.
wasn't that through Wildlife Prints or something
It
like
was,
that?
yeah,
Or
it was,
oh,
yeah,
okay.
it was, yeah. It, again, great story, right? It was at the time I was restoring a car, and the guy that I was getting my supplies from, he was dealing with a banker whose son was an art print dealer in Toronto. So he says, do you want me to talk to her so you can arrange a meeting with her son and maybe get something going, right? And I hadn't done any prints. I just started doing wildlife, and and it was just one of those things. And I was like, yeah, that'd be great, right? I mean, I was 25, 26 at the time, so I was a young guy. And we eventually got a relationship going. He started distributing prints. He was distributing to White Rock Gallery when they were a print gallery, had prints incorporated into their original inventory. And then, yeah, she contacted me and said, hey, how would you like to show some original work? I was like, absolutely. So,
Damn, nice.
yeah. And that's how that all played out, right? It's, I said, very good fortune in the sense, of who you
Yeah.
know, and those sorts of things. And, that story that's kind of a repeated story throughout my career, because I was working for the Law Society, BC, and they had a great corporate office with some great, Gordon Smiths, and just some really wonderful paintings on their wall. But they had one blank
Mhm.
space, and I said, "Hey, how would you feel about me hanging a painting
Oh,
here?"
come on. Did
They're
you?
like, "Painting? What are you talking about?" No one knew what I did, right? I
Oh,
mean,
no doubt. And they're
yeah,
probably thinking, oh, just stupid
yeah,
painting of this guy's
exactly,
stuff.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
So they were like, so I showed them my portfolio, which was at the time like a hard portfolio.
Oh,
And
yeah.
they said, yeah, that'd be great. So they
Huh.
gave me a wall and I hung it. And the current president of the Law Society at the time was retiring. He really loved this painting because it was an East Coast painting, right? It was a fishing village and some of the trawlers and stuff. And so they bought it for him. And they eventually allowed me to put something else up. And then one of the lawyers, yeah, I'd seen the piece and said, hey, we've got a friend over in Victoria who's opening up a new gallery. Would you like to set up
Oh,
a meeting? Right. And that basically was another one of those doors that just opened. And so, yeah, I mean, the timing and just being really lucky,
yeah, no doubt.
I'm a
And
true
if,
believer of luck, right? I mean, you can
well,
work hard, but
absolutely,
you
right?
got luck on your side. It helps, right?
Well,
So,
you have to be prepared for it too, right?
yeah,
Had this been 10
yeah.
years earlier, probably nothing would have
No,
happened, right?
exactly, exactly.
Yeah,
That's why I said I
exactly.
wouldn't change anything, anything. Like if I could redo, I wouldn't do anything because I
Yeah.
fell into place when it should have fallen into place. I think any earlier or any later, and things just wouldn't have worked out the way they would have. So
Absolutely, that's right.
yeah, yeah.
And so speaking of wildlife, though, if anybody wants to see some of Renato's early work, you actually have a small quick video on Instagram that you recently posted, right?
I do, yeah, yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I've got one of my like the literally I've got it hanging on my wall in my entryway here. But it was what my first wildlife piece that had been published in 1991. And I gave my parents the original to my parents, and when we ended up having to sell my parents' home, it came back home with me. So it's kind of neat to actually have it here after all that time. So
So even from your wildlife days to now, possibly even 10 years ago, though, how much has your process changed?
yeah, I mean, when I was doing wildlife, I was working with acrylic. So yeah, things were way, way tighter. Yeah, it was just, I mean, it was illustration, like it was really tight. And then went to the extreme after seeing the Group of Seven show and just going, I'm abandoning this, and like
Yeah.
literally completely abandoned wildlife painting and realism altogether, and kind of went right into the realm of impressionism, almost to the point of abstraction. And then as time progressed, kind of started pulling back again. And I moved out here. The landscape here, especially in the Fraser Valley, was just so different than what I'd experienced, even just living, an hour into town in Vancouver. This was just so traditional. I mean, it just felt so turn of the century, right? It
Mm,
was very atmospheric, heavy skies, very quiet, big vast spaces, and it was like, wow, okay, I feel like
that's right.
I feel
Yeah.
like I'm at home, right? So it was kind of, I took both this realism that I had kind of implemented in my work, and then this kind of almost pseudo abstractionism, and then just kind of mixed the two together, and I kind of ended up with where I'm at now. So
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And with Maple Ridge, now that you say it's, the way you said it, you throw a windmill in there and it's very much a Dutch landscape, isn't it?
well, it is. I mean, the whole
Yeah.
area was diked by the Dutch, right?
True enough, right?
This is a
Yeah.
floodplain, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the Americans tried the Canadian government failed, the American government, American engineers failed back in turn of the century, and then the Dutch came in and they managed to actually get the dike system to work. So yeah, I mean, you look at
Yeah.
any sort of photographs of the Netherlands and stuff, yeah, you see the correlation, right? Like
Oh,
it's,
yeah. 100%. Right.
yeah, absolutely.
That's so
Absolutely.
cool.
Yeah,
One of the last questions here from
sure.
those attending, and I'm going to elaborate on it a bit though, but you joined Arcadia when they had moved to LA. So they were an LA gallery, and
I
then
did, yeah,
they moved back to New York.
they did.
So how tickled pink or enthusiastic were you when you became a New York selling artist? Yeah.
I was again, it was one of those things where I had Steve, the owner, phone me. And I mean, Arcadia was always on the list of galleries. That was kind of like my last stop, I
I
figured.
can imagine, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
like Arcadia, like, oh, that's the gallery I want to be in. And
Yeah.
I just never had never had the courage to actually go and knock on a door. And again, it was just one of those things. It's like, you know what, they'll see my work if they see it, and if they like it, they'll call me, whatever. And I just kind of put that out of my head. But when they went back to New York, I was pretty happy. I think so was he. It's,
Yeah.
he's a New York guy, and if you ever get a chance to meet Steve, you'll understand what I mean by that. He is
That's
just all
funny.
New York. He's a really cool guy. So
So
yeah.
I anticipate that your recent show there went pretty well then.
It went fantastic. Yeah,
Nice.
it was a great exhibition. And unfortunately, the first time I did a solo show with them, we were right in the middle of COVID, so I wasn't able to go. Yeah, so it was a tough one. And but that show sold out, and with the exception of one small painting, and then that eventually sold. But and this was pretty much the same thing happened again. So it was very cool
No doubt, no doubt.
experience.
And
I mean, it's a highlight. It's a feather in my hat, right? As an artist, I think as as any artist, hopes for in their life, to
yeah,
go New York just is, and it just seems like the place, right? Is it
absolutely
the
right.
place?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it always just felt like the place to be. If, you
Oh,
ever
absolutely.
if you
It's
ever
iconic, right?
managed to get there, right? And I feel really, really fortunate that
Yeah,
I was able to do a couple of shows there. So
very nice. All right. And we're coming to the hour, and I have two more questions that I ask everyone. And the first one would be, what is the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
I don't know if it's so much a piece of advice that I've been given as opposed to a philosophy, that I kind of gotten from my father. And, it's, you can never fail by working hard. You just don't, you can't. If you put the time in, good things will happen. And that's just as simple as it gets. This is, I'm looking at a man who immigrated from Italy with no language, no money, no home, a family to feed, and all he did was work. That was his thing. He just worked. And he worked his ass off, and he, allowed my mom to stay home to raise us. And, that was his objective, right? He wanted to allow that for her because he understood how important traditionalism was in our family. So that was probably the biggest bit of advice that was given to me, not through words, but more through example.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly right. Yeah, that's old school for sure, right?
It is, yeah. It goes no different with anything that you do in life, period, right? If you apply yourself, simply just put the time in, right? Just put the time in, and something good will happen. It always does. It always does, and it doesn't. Hang on a second here. All right, there you go. You can see.
If it doesn't, just paint more and wait for it to happen.
Yeah, well, and that's
come
just
along.
it, right? It's just it, right? You can wish and hope and all of those things, but all of that, it's just wishful thinking as opposed to doing, right? And it's really important. Not everything is going to come easy. It never does in this business. It's difficult, very, very competitive business now. It's crazy competitive, and it's changing for everybody. How people are selling the work, all that kind of stuff, right? So if you put the time in, you'll benefit from it one way or another.
That's a great way to live for sure. Now, hopefully this can be different, change it up a bit, but what's the top piece of advice you can give others besides working hard?
Well, and that's pretty much it. What else can I say, right? There is enough information out there nowadays. When we were growing up, you had to hit the library if you wanted to learn anything, or you took courses, right? You went to school and did it that way. But nowadays there's enough information online on the web that you can learn what you need to learn technically, but ultimately make your own path in this in this business, or in your studio anyways. It's find your own voice, and the less time you spend chasing somebody else's ideas and more time spent on just what you do, then it'll just be a more positive outcome in the end, really.
Thank you for that. Just reinforcing it. Be yourself.
Yeah,
don't be someone else. Put in the work.
And that's just it, right? Yeah, it's the more work you put in, the more time you spend doing and experimenting and playing around with your medium, the quicker that'll come, right? They always say, do 100 paintings. Don't talk to me until you do 100 paintings. When you get to the end of 100 paintings, your opinion of things will probably change some, and you'll probably learn way more than you would have ever learned, reading a book or watching a video or asking somebody else, whatever. And
100%.
Yeah. And it's just, that's the reality of it, right?
That's awesome. Thank you for that.
And
that brings us to an hour. I thank you very much for your time, Renato. If
hope it was
you want to find,
thanks for everybody who stuck around.
Absolutely, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure everybody knows on the internet, Renato is at renatomuccillo.com, 2 C's, 2 L's. And on Instagram, he goes with the handle Renato Muccillo _fine_arts. Best place to find him. I'm sure everyone here has been following you for years.
Sure so because of it. Yeah. So it's
absolutely. So thank you very much for coming here, Renato. I really appreciate it. It's wonderful.
My pleasure.
Hopefully we'll see you on the decks again.
Yeah, absolutely. You'll see us anyways. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And thank you for everyone who attended. Without you, this conversation wouldn't have been possible. So I really appreciate it. And with that, we're going to say goodnight. Take care, everyone, wherever you are.
Take it easy, guys. Thank you again.